Welcome. This is the first of a series of videos about happiness. And we're going to start with a simple question, but an important question, because let's really talk about what's at stake here and why you should care. My question to you is, how can you be happy if you don't know what happiness is? How do you know you've arrived at your goal if you can't define what the goal is? Now, this may seem like a silly question, but let me ask you, what is happiness? You tell me. Is happiness a thing? Is happiness a feeling? Is happiness the act of doing something? Is it the end result of doing that thing? Well, if you're like most people, you can't really put your finger on it. But I'm here today to help you clarify what it is so you can more clearly communicate what it is that you're actually striving to achieve. And if you want to hear way more about happiness, go to ontheartof.com and watch the free workshop. In the workshop, you'll learn the difference between happiness and fulfillment, why each is important, the biggest mistakes people make in their pursuit of each, and exactly what you need to do to achieve both. So if this video is interesting to you, go check out the workshop because we go way farther into the material there. Well, I want to quickly point out three things that are important in shaping our discussion, kind of historical context around happiness. The first is people have cared about happiness well before there were mature information networks, meaning you had all these little pockets of people from different cultures, speaking different languages, practicing different religions, talking about happiness. So one of the things we need to do is look across all of that work and kind of synthesize what people are actually talking about. The second thing that's important to know is that for most of human history, happiness was really the realm of philosophers and religion, people working without empirical data. Nothing against them, but modern science and scientific analysis and neuroscience exploring happiness is really a recent invention, which is exciting because what we're able to do is take a bunch of ideas that have been talked about for a very long time and actually test them empirically. And then finally, language is an imprecise tool. You have this all the time in philosophy where there are two different philosophers using the same word to mean different things, and then therefore there's some confusion and their analysis kind of doesn't match up because they're using the same word differently. And there's also the problem of just translation. If you look at ancient Greek philosophy, Aristotle, Socrates, the Greeks are talking about terms in Greek that don't really have direct translations into English. And of course, you could use the same example to talk about, Arabic to French or whatever. There's just this lost in translation effect. And so you really have to dig deeper to look at what they were talking about to kind of contextualize it in, our native tongue, English, for example. But if you were to zoom out and look at kind of the entire history of discussion and discourse around happiness across time and space and cultures, you would find that essentially there's two different questions at hand. And the first deals with a state of mind, or happiness in the psychological sense. That is, what is a state of mind that we call happiness? Do we have control over it? And if so, how do we achieve it? Also, is it valuable? You may say, of course, happiness is valuable, but I'm sure you've heard someone once say, something like ignorance is bliss, which essentially suggests that only stupid people can be happy. And in fact, many intellectuals for centuries have suggested that either happiness is something only stupid people could ever be, because if you were smart enough to realize the suffering of this world, you could never be happy, or it's something that's just useless, it's not valuable. And so I don't think it's a trivial question then for us to really explore. Is happiness actually valuable? Even if we can define it, is it valuable? We'll come back to that. The second body of literature around happiness is really about this idea of a life that goes well for the person leading it, or as we'll talk about it, happiness in the well-being sense. There's something really important going on here. You may have noticed it, but if not, I want to point it out to you. And that is, this definition of happiness requires us to make a values judgment. Is my life going well for me? Now, because we're making a values judgment, if you and I have different values, we will answer this question differently. For example, if for you, for example, being a loving parent is the most important thing in your life and the most uh, important use of your time and your energy in this world. Whereas my uh, soul's journey is to be an artist, to have artistic expression as part of my path. And so we are going to judge differently what it means to live a good life or to have a life that goes well for us. And we can both be right. Those are not mutually exclusive. We are the only person who has to answer that question for ourselves. Nobody else can tell us what to do. And as you might surmise, this is where we really get into talk of fulfillment. What are the requirements for me to live a good life? What is the way that I am supposed to express my unique potential in this life? So I hope it's clear to you from that past little bit of discussion that we're really talking about two different things here. But if not, let me just give you a few examples that will show you kind of fringe cases of where you have one but not the other. So one example that's talked about a lot in philosophical discourse is the tortured or starving artist. The idea that you have this hypothetical person who doesn't sleep, doesn't eat right, doesn't have any friends, isn't practicing self-love in any kind of a way, and is generally just in a bad mood because of it, right? Day to day, they're just kind of in a bad mood because they're not taking care of themselves. And yet, if you were to ask that person, is your life going well for you? They would say yes. Why? Because they felt that their work was important, that they were doing something that only they could uniquely do, that they were bringing to life a vision that only they could bring to life. So therefore, they could be very unhappy in the sort of psychological sense, but be happy in the well-being sense. Now, the other example I would say, which is one that I relate to personally, and which brought me to studying all this philosophy and psychology of happiness, is someone in an existential crisis. I had a long-standing existential crisis, which I only recently solved. And I know many people, many students I have in my courses are in a similar boat. And you're not alone. And so what you might find yourself, and I found a situation I found myself was I was happy in a psychological sense. I slept well, I had great friends, good job, quote unquote. Uh, Took care of myself, practiced self-love, did all the things. I was in a good mood daily. I was in a good mood, but I felt like something was missing. I wasn't sure that I was doing the thing that I was supposed to do with my life. And so therefore, if you would have asked me, is your life going well for you? It would have been like a deep breath, like maybe a no, but it wouldn't have been that emphatic yes that the tortured artist might have. So again, just another example of how you might have one but not the other. And so yes, there really are two different things when we talk about happiness. There's really two different things we're talking about. And by the way, two unique sets of things that we need to do to cultivate both. Now, back to the question, is happiness valuable? Yes, absolutely yes, especially as we are living through a pandemic and dealing with all the stress and anxiety brought on by that. And this is one area where science, especially in the last 10 or 20 years, has been extraordinarily helpful in proving that, yes, tending to our happiness is extremely valuable to us. It can reduce our stress and anxiety. It can make us more creative as thinkers. It can make us more resilient. It literally helps to build our immune system and so much more. Happiness has a profound impact on our life. So you see, we really got two different quests to conquer. To achieve happiness in the psychological sense is really about learning to exert control over our state of mind. And let me tell you, you do have control. You may not think you have control, but you do have control. And you'll see how in the videos that follow. Our second quest is to figure out what it means for us to have a life that goes well for us. What are the requirements of a good life, essentially, for us? And that requires us to let go of what other people have told us, the way we've been conditioned, because most of that stuff is all wrong. We need to let go of all that stuff so that we can listen to ourselves and figure out for ourselves what it means to have a good life. As I said, there are unique things that we need to do to cultivate happiness in both senses of the term. And that's why I started On the Art of, to launch 2 courses, each dealing with what we need to do to achieve happiness in each of those senses of the term, in the psychological sense and in the well-being sense. Now, I don't care who you are or where you're starting out. I know and have the data to show you that no matter who you are, where you're starting out, you can achieve happiness in both senses of the term. And before I tell you what the next video in this series will feature, let me just remind you that if any of the things that we talked about today are interesting to you, please go check out the workshop at ontheartof.com, and you'll hear way more about happiness and all the things that we talked about today. In my next video, I'm going to tell you more about the uniquenesses of each of these pursuits, what you need to do to achieve happiness in both senses of the term. And I'm also going to tell you why most of what you've been told in your life is totally wrong.